Hi guys, Appa here again. Today I'll be looking at Bant Ephemerate. This is a deck that tries to, I don't know, lock the opponent out of the game, I guess. It plays a lot of value creatures in the form of Coiling Oracle, Lanover Visionary, or Sigit Oracle, Archaeomancer, Muldrifter, Stonehoard Dignitary. So the deck that the way this deck works is that if you have Archaeomancer and Ephemerate, you can recur one ETB each turn. So if you're recurring the Archaeomancer trigger, you can recur, for example, a counterspell or a temporal spring or a dispel or a pulse of Murasa each turn, or even a Weather the Storm versus Burn each turn, or if you have any other value creature, you can just draw extra cards each turn. So that's more or less what the deck's trying to do. But most importantly for our purposes, this is a 3-color deck. So an important thing that you will notice is that even though we have 3 colors, most of the cards are blue. If we just remove all the cards that aren't blue here, you will see that most of the cards are blue. And just we remove the few ephemerates. So 22 of our cards are blue. Then we have only 5 cards that are white. And then we have 15 cards that are green. So, I almost forgot about the Pro Spring. So actually 24 of our cards are blue. So this means that blue is our primary color. Another important thing to note is that we play Counterspell in this deck. So Counterspell is a bit difficult to cast because it's double blue. Another important thing is that we play cantrips in form of Preordain and Ponder. So this means that we want to have as much blue sources as possible. So that's the thing that we are trying to maximize on our mana base. But also we want to be able to cast Ephemerate, and since we have 3 Ephemerates and you want to cast this each turn, you have to have more than one source of white. So if we change all of our Thriving Lands for Evolving Wilds, we will have like only one way of finding one plains. So this means that we literally wouldn't be able to play several Ephemerates on one turn. So we need to have extra ways of casting Ephemerate. And then we have also Moment's Peace and Weather the Storm and Coiling Oracle and all of these green cards, also additional green and white cards in the sideboard, and additional blue cards, of course, as well. So an important thing is that even though we play only 10 counter spells in the main, in some matchups we are going to bring more counter magic up, for example versus Tron, I guess. So this means that you want to have as much blue as possible, because if you aren't able to hold up double counterspell on a turn, for example, that might change the way that match goes. An additional thing that I wanted to see here is how Thriving Lands impact our format, because these are fairly new cards. So maybe you don't know what this card does. So this enters tap, but you can choose any color, and this taps for blue or the chosen color. We have 4 of the blue one, and we have 2 of the green one. So this means that we have in total 6 Thriving Lands. So since you can choose the color that it taps, even an off-color Thriving Land would work as an additional Evolving Wilds that don't shuffle your deck. So this means that when you play this, you have to decide which color are you going to use for the following turns. So you can see this as maybe a strictly better Guildgate, right? So this is going to be strictly better than Guildgate in this deck. But you can also see that it's, I think that's how it's spelled. It's going to be not strictly better than Thornwood Falls, but it's going to be almost strictly better than this card. So this means that if you play Thriving Lands, you're going to have really good mana base, since these cards, the Thriving Lands, the Gain Lands, are played all across the format, and this card is almost strictly better. This means that we are going to have a really strong mana base. And most importantly, what this card does is that it allows you to play to fix for any color. So this means that theoretically you could be just removing the white from your deck, for example, and bringing Pyroblast, for example, and you would be able to cast them because you have your Thriving Lands to cast it. Of course, only 6 sources, but you get the idea. So Tron, most importantly, uses that idea and actually does that thing. I don't think I have Tron built up here. Maybe I do. Here I do. So in this build of Tron, for example, well, yeah, you have one Rolling Thunder in the main, but even some decks don't play it. But since you have so many Thriving Lands and Prophetic Prison and Ponder's Ornament, you're actually able to play any color. So you can bring like Doomblade and Gripping the Graves from the sideboard here, or Pyroblasts and remove other colors and such. So this means that post-board you're going to see that Tron plays the Thriving Isle as a blue-red duel most of the time instead of the green-blue duel that it almost does in the first game of the match. So yeah, that's just a quite quick side note on Thriving Lands and how they work. So this means that dual lands help us with fixing our colors, but it also helps us have double of one of the colors while also having access to the other colors. So let's say that you want to hold up Ephemerate and double counters, but normally if you play a land, a mana base with only Ash Barrens and Evolving Wilds, you would be able to do that with 4 lands, but with Thriving Lands you can do that. Similarly to how you can do that with double lands, but these are better for that because if you want to keep, for example, on the following turns Moment's Peace up instead of Ephemerate, you can decide that instead of just being the land deciding for you, basically. Importantly, the Thriving Lands enters always tapped, in difference with Evolving Wilds, because Evolving Wilds fetch a basic, but then if you bounce the basic to your hand and play it again, for example with a bounce land, then that land is going to enter untapped. So if you have this on your opening hand, yeah, for sure you're going to have 3 lands, but you're going to have like 1 mana on turn 2 and 2 mana on turn 3, instead of having 1 mana on turn 2 and 3 mana on turn 3. If this was a Evolving Wilds, of course. So, yeah, I wanted to go mostly about the mana base and how many sources we have for each color, and not go all that far into what this deck does, because I already did kind of that on my league on this deck. I kind of explained what the deck does, and I actually ran the deck through a league. And yeah, I don't want to go super deep into this because this deck is really really deep. You can do a lot of weird things with this. So yeah, go check it out if you are curious about how the deck works. But so this deck plays 22 lands, which is a fairly high amount of lands. For example, Tron also played 22 lands. It's almost the maximum amount you are going to see of lands in a deck. And most importantly, this deck also plays Sim-Growth Chamber as additional mana sources. So this means that you're going to be able to play your Muldrifters and your Archaeomancer with Ephemerate backup fairly consistently. Additionally, you have Calling Oracle and Lenovo Visionary that help us cast our spells in the later turns with a bit of ramp or card draw. Right? And additional things is that we have kind of a cantrip suit in 4 Preordains and 2 Ponders in this case. Yeah, so let's go through each color and see how many sources we have for each color. Let's see, for example, for green. So as we saw before, all Thriving Lands tap for each color that we care about. So these are going to be actually 3 lands. 3 lands, sorry. So in total we have 14 mana sources for green, and that's very, very good because Ephemerate and Stonehoard Dignitary are actually high drops. We don't care about Ephemerate on turn 1 or turn 2 or turn 3 even. If we can do that, then we are okay with it, we are fine with it, but it's not our main goal. Our main goal is to play early green and blue cards. And our earliest for green is actually turn 2 with Coiling Oracle. And playing turn 2 Coiling Oracle is very good because it can accelerate us to a turn 3, for example, Llanowar Visionary with Ephemerate backup or something like that. Or maybe double Coiling Oracle or Coiling Oracle plus Counterspell. So the rank that the Coiling Oracle gives, even though it's not guaranteed, it's very good, and it actually always gives us something of value. Even just cantripping, even a 2 mana 1/1 that cantrips is okay, and it helps us when you have Ephemerate, for example, to use it as a value card. Because if you Ephemerate a Green Oracle and it only just draw cards, then it means that Ephemerate was a 1 mana draw 2, and that's very, very strong. 1 mana draw 2 will be banned in any format. So let's see again. 14 sources of green, and we have only 2 drops. So we have 14 here. We have 7 cards that we are going to see. This isn't working. I'm going to recharge the page. Sorry about that. Yeah. So it's around 86% of the time that we are going to be able to cast our 2-drop. That's pretty high. Normally the threshold that we have for being acceptable is around 85% of the time. So this means that 14 is kind of the right number. You could be playing also 13 if you want to be a bit more gambly, because you have the cantrips to help you to cast your spells, but I think it's correct to have 14, because you don't really, if you have to spend your cantrips fixing for your colors all of the time, then you are going to be needing more islands too. So I think it's correct to try to fix your colors with your mana base. Let's go on and see how many white sources we have. So we remove all of this. We have only 10, right? Ash Barrens, Thriving Lands, all fetch for, in some way or another, to white. But as we saw before, Ephemerate, we are not wanting to cast this until turn 4 or 5, and Stormhold Dignitary turn 4. So we can actually do the calculations here. Instead of 7, we are going to look at 10 cards. So that's, again, around 86% of the time, so that's actually pretty good. Even without taking into account cantrips that we are using some of the time to fix our colors, this means that naturally, just by drawing cards and kind of by chance, we are going to have a white source for turn 4. And that's very good, because we want to cast our Stonehorn to keep us alive on turn 4, and we want to be able to cast our Ephemerate eventually. So, yeah. And then lastly, we're going to look at blue. We have all of these blue sources. That's 20 blue sources. That's actually insanely high amount of blue sources. But as we saw before, the more the merrier, right? We can do the calculations here that we want to have 2 on turn 2. Sorry, turn 2. Around 82% of the time for counterspell. But again, you don't really need to cast counterspell on turn 2. You'll be happy if you cast counterspell on turn 2, but then again, we can't actually use the semi-growth chamber for that, so maybe this is a moot point. If we look at turn 3 counterspell, we're going to see that it's very, very high. Also, for example, Archaeomancer is going to be turn 4 double blue, is going to be around 90% of the time, so that's awesome. So we have a lot of, even if you look at this, the only non-blue sources are these 2 lands. So almost all of our lands are going to tap for blue, which is very interesting. Maybe not tap for blue, because if you play an Ash Barrens out, you aren't going to be able to fix for blue, but you get what I mean, right? So yeah, that's about colors. So about colors, this means that without taking into account cantrips, we are able to cast with fairly good consistency turn 2 white and turn 2 green and turn 4 white. And we are not going to be reliable casting turn 2 counterspell, but turn 3 counterspell is completely doable. Also, if we take into account cantrips, we are going to have a lot of that. So, following on, we have a high curve. This means that we finish on turn 5 with Muldrifter. I'm not going to take Landlord Visionary as ramp for this, because you could be playing Landlord Visionary or Secret Oracle. Let's just say that we play Secret Oracle instead, just to see how it works. Let's put the foil one, yeah. So Yeah. So this way we don't have any good way of ramping except Coiling Oracle that's unreliably a ramp spell, right? So we are not going to be taking that into account. We are just going to consider it a cantrip for the purposes of casting a turn 5 Moldrifter. I just remove the Land Visionaries for simplicity's sake. So we have 22 lands and we want to have a 5 drops. We want to cast a 5 drop, sorry. If we do the calculation here, it's going to give us a very low amount. But importantly, we have 4 Significant Chamber, which, if you remember the previous lessons, this counts for 2 lands actually, because you can return a land to your hand, and that basically means that this card is card advantage in the form of extra land drops. So we have 4 extra lands. That's around 60% now. And we can now also take into account the cantrips. So how many lands does each cantrip represent? Since we have 26 lands, if we do the calculation that we are used to do now, for Preordain, for example, is about 82% of the time, and for Ponder is going to be a bit more, 90% of the time. To be able to find one land. So if we multiply this by 4 plus this times 2, that gives us around 6 extra lands. So if we go back to the previous calculation, we have 26, 11, and 5, and we add 5 extra more lands, we have 31. And now we are around 78% of the time. What else do we have? We have 4 Coiling Oracles, and Coiling Oracle is a 1 mana cantrip, a 2 mana cantrip, so this means that it's 57. We have 24 extra lands, and the sample size here is only 1. And the number here says that it's around this number. I didn't copy it. I'm an idiot. Yeah, plus this times 4. So we are ending up now. And then Seed Oracle, which sees 1 extra card, but it costs 1 more. It's going to represent around this number. So it's around 9 extra lands. So if we go back to our calculation, which was 26 plus 9, 35, and we want to cast our 5 drop, then we are going to have around 90% of the time. This is, of course, if we use all of our cantrips to finding lands, right? Which, of course, normally it doesn't happen, and that's fine. This is just a way of us trying to calculate what are the odds of we casting a turn 5 Moldrifter if we really want to. And the answer to that is really high. We are very able to cast a Moldrifter on turn 5. Also, an important thing is that sometimes you can just evoke it and ephemerate it. For example, if your opponent is tapped out, you can also just wait and cast other things, because most of our deck is really cheap, and additionally, Moldrifter is a very good 5-drop because you can always cast it for 3. So you can look at your mana base, at your curve like this, something like this. This means that you can just evoke your Drifter if you need land drops, and you can just cast your Moldrifter if you have the lands in your hand. So Moldrifter is such a good card in the sense that it always helps you with doing what you need. Of course, if you are just casting it for 3 and letting it die, it doesn't really do anything to the board, which means that it has some downside to just casting a Moldrifter on turn 3. You are falling behind on board, you are falling behind on tempo. So a bit of what this deck does for that reason, to be able to work, is that it has ways of recouping the tempo. First of all is that it can just ignore tempo by playing a Turbo Fog deck. Sorry, the click isn't working now. Okay, so if this deck plays the Turbo Fog kind of route, you don't really care about having blockers, for example, or pressuring your opponent. You don't care. You just ignore the combat phase. of your opponent with Stonehold Dignitary and Manabases. So there are other builds similar to Bant Ephemerate. For example, you can see a Sky. I don't think I have one here. So this deck is very similar. Maybe this build has also Prismatic Strands additional fogs, but some builds don't have Prismatic Strands and instead just rely on removal spells. So this means that this build in particular, for example, doesn't really want to cast a turn 3 Evoke Drifter and do nothing, because you're falling behind on tempo, and this deck is much more tempo oriented. And this build isn't as tempo oriented because it doesn't really care. Sometimes you have the blockers for your opponent's creatures, and that's fine, and you can just play the tempo game, right? Just answer threats on the board and just block with your creatures and not die and survive until you do your thing. But this deck can also just ignore the opponent by just saying, yeah, I'm going to take 7 on the crackback, but just doing nothing to the board with Moondrifter. But I don't care because I'm going to draw my, for example, my land that I need to cast my turn 4 Stonehold Dignitary. And that's something very important in this deck, that it can just ignore the opponent a bit and then eventually just win the game, but that's another story. So yeah, that's mostly it for this analysis. I don't think this analysis is going to be very long because I also just went really fast through everything because this is already the episode number 8, I believe. So yeah, this is not going to be a super in-depth analysis on what this deck does and all of that. You just go through more or less how to calculate everything for this deck. And yeah, so that's another important thing I wanted to touch is the tempo thing here. So many of your cards are tempo negative. For example, Omen's Peace, Weather the Storm, Temporal Spring not, but all of these and Evoke Drifters, these are all tempo negative. Ghostly Flicker also can be tempo negative because you aren't adding anything to the board, and Ephemerate doesn't really add anything to the board, and all of this doesn't do anything in terms of adding things to the board. Then Archaeomancer is just a 1-2, so it doesn't really matter, and these are 1-1s that just champ block. So as you see, this isn't a tempo-oriented deck. So if you look at, for example, let's say Boros Bully here, how many of these cards are in tempo positive place? This actually adds to the board because you can just use it to ambush your opponent and and kill creatures that you were just trading before. So it actually helps. Olion Ring, answer threats. Journey to Nowhere adds response to threats. All of these do things, well, except maybe Faithless Looting in some situations. So as you see, this is a more tempo positive deck. This is a more maybe not aggressive, right? Because you are playing steel cards like Guardian of the Guildpact, which isn't particularly aggressive, or maybe Journey to Nowhere isn't an aggressive card because it's removal that can go face. But all of this affects the board, which is most of the cards in your deck. And then if you look, for example, let's look at another random deck. Sky Ephemerate, as we saw before. How many of these cards aren't tempo positive? This is all of it, and again, Evoke Drifters. All of the rest of the cards, well, maybe, oh, sorry about that. All of these, plus Brainstorms here, and Preordains. Yeah. So all of these are actually tempo positive cards. These remove threats, these block threats, and is a threat too. This can answer an opponent threat or removal spell and put a body on the board. This can answer a removal spell. So it has so many tempo positive plays. You see, 26 of the cards are tempo positive. Well, plus the Moondrifters on the late game, and the rest is not. Again, that can be a bit contentious because you can say that Ephemerate is tempo positive because it can answer a removal spell, and that's kind of true too. So you can see that as positive in some decks, in some configurations of decks. So when you are looking at that, you can kind of see if the game is about tempo or not, if the game plan of the deck is about tempo or not. In this deck in particular, it's not about tempo most of the time. You only have 2 removal spells that are there just to have an out to some things. For example, if the opponent plays a Pestilence, then you have an out in your deck. Or if your opponent just removes all of your creatures with Journey to Nowhere, then you have an answer here. You can also just, as the name says, very temporal spring. You can answer, for example, an opponent threat and just continue developing. But the idea of this deck is that you are going to eventually render tempo useless by just fogging the opponent to death. And if you look, for example, at Tron here, this build I think I took from Raptor. Again, how many of these cards affect the board? Maybe you have 2 Prohibits, the Stonehorn Dignitary, and the Muldrifters and Mnemonic Walls and Rolling Thunder. So it's not a tempo-oriented deck. This deck tries to ignore tempo and ignore the battlefield to win by other means. This is more or less the same idea that we had before in the Bant deck, that we have Moment's Peace here. That's just, Moment's Peace and Stonehorn Dignitary to ignore tempo of the opponent. If your opponent plays tempo and kills your creatures and attacks every turn and everything, and then you just fog, and then you return the fog to your hand and then fog again, this means that you can ignore tempo from your opponent. So I'm sorry if this is going in circles a bit, but I really wanted to stress that out because I think it's very interesting to see that. Yeah, so I think that's all for now. So thank you so much for watching. If you really enjoyed this, please let me know. I'm going to continue probably with this series of Manabases. I'm not so sure about what I'm going to do next. I really enjoy doing these episodes, mostly as a way of me talking through things and understanding more or less what this deck does, and etc. And try to see if the mana base can be improved. So, for example, one thing we could do here is even remove one of the tap lands for an untap land, because we have so many, so much consistency on the colors. That's one thing I'm thinking right now. Maybe that's an upgrade. So it's something that I could be testing out a bit. So yeah, this helped. I hope it helps you, and at least it helps me to understand these decks and trying to see how the deck works and what to do and how to improve the deck, and also how to develop a deck. And I think maybe that's what I'm going to do in the next episode, is try to develop a deck, try to decide an idea and try to go for there and see how to build the mana base from scratch. I already kind of did that for the Slivers deck, but I think that's a very interesting kind of take, and I think it has a lot of good things to it. And maybe I will build a deck and then go through a league or something to show the deck off and see how to work from there. So again, thank you so much for watching, and see you next time.